2012, 2025, it's the fourth year and day, 303 since the full-scale invasion began. Welcome to the Daily Situation Report. Today's report covers new drone strikes on major Russian industries, more failed Russian assaults near Kostiantynivka and Oropilya, and the first combat use of Australian Abrams tanks by Ukraine. In addition, unusual decisions and internal reports shed light on structural problems in Russia's military leadership and on the growing gap between the propaganda and the actual situation at the front. But first, many thanks to a longtime viewer of the channel who sent this great picture. Stefan was able to incorporate the War and Tactic logo into his PC's cooling system, and I think it really looks impressive. The new Leopard from the War and Tactic shop, which is on top, also fits perfectly into the picture. All pre-Christmas orders should have received their glass photos already. If you want one like that too, you can order them again now. They are always collected and then will arrive sometime towards the end of January because, as I said, we always have to order in batches. The link for that can be found in the video description under Nerd Bases. But if you have patches or other quite creative contributions with the War and Tactic logo, t-shirts, or anything else, feel free to send them to me. I like to mention things like that in the Situation Report because this amazing community makes it all possible, and everyone should see it. Before we dive into Ukraine, let's take a quick look overseas, because there's a rather interesting report that has attracted attention in the last few hours. For the first time, a modern warship, and even an entire class of ships, is to be named after a political leader who is still alive. That's very unusual, even internationally. Even authoritarian states have historically respected this boundary. Neither the Third Reich nor Imperial Japan, neither the Soviet Union under Stalin nor North Korea have named warships after sitting leaders. The only somewhat comparable case I could find was the Soviet aircraft carrier Leonid Brezhnev in the early 1980s. So, a product of the later personality cult, which was later quietly corrected when the ship was, of course, renamed. But the reason for this decades-long taboo is no coincidence. First, sailors and our pilots are quite superstitious. And second, from a military and political standpoint, it's considered very risky to directly associate weapon systems with a living person. If this person later falls out of favor, dies, is removed or discredited, well, let me put it this way. In quotation marks, this stigma is also passed on to the system itself, even if technically everything should be fine with it. But of course, Trump doesn't expect that because as a sort of God emperor, he could never possibly fall out of favor. But what is falling, however, are drones from the sky, because a new drone attack on the Stavrolen petrochemical plant was carried out by the Ukrainians. The facility has a complete hydrocarbon processing cycle and also produces polymers that are used for composites, structural components, seals, and insulation. These materials are, of course, found in almost every product the Army needs, so there is also a wide range of applications in military equipment. This is especially true for making drone components, which Russians also fire daily at Ukraine. Yesterday, we saw how the Russians rode on horseback across fields into Ukraine and attacked there. You can likely guess the outcome if you missed yesterday's Situation Report. But today we see a better alternative without having to send the poor horses or donkeys with their riders to certain death. The solution is the bicycle. Here you see a Russian bicycle group on their way to the area of operation, somehow reminiscent of the bicycle companies from the First and Second World Wars. Just like with horses, there's a good reason why such units have been declining since the First World War and hardly exist anymore. At Kostiantynivka, the Russians attacked yesterday with a column along the southern access road. They were stopped at the Blue Pin. You can probably guess the outcome of the attack again. Anyone, military or not, should know that with so many drones, a column attack over open ground is lethal. At the Red Pin, the Russians tried to attack Ukrainian soldiers with artillery. We can assume they're still holding positions on the city's outskirts. The Russians probably tried to prevent the Ukrainians here to keep the convoy from getting into a dangerous place for urban combat, but the convoy didn't even make it into the town. Yesterday, we saw the Russians launch another convoy attack near Dovropilya, with similar results as before. We already know that. But this time criticism from the Russian side came surprisingly fast and even from within their own ranks. The Russian military blogger Romanov sharply criticized yesterday's failed attack in the Devropilya area. The commander was Akhmedov. He described the violation as a repetition of earlier failures in Pavlika and Vuhledar and accused Akhmedov of sacrificing a column of about 30 vehicles now that he had greater freedom of action. And not only the column, but also the Marines who were with them. He said the attack caused heavy losses without any major territorial gains. His approach continued to be limited to moving in columns. The price for that had to be paid by the Marines. In the end, he uses the words "I used myself yesterday," and then adds an approximate number of vehicles. 30 is almost twice as many as I expected, and it definitely shows us that the scale of the attack goes far beyond what was initially reported, of course, assuming his information is accurate. From the same area, a report states that the first Australian M1 Abrams tanks delivered just days ago have already participated in initial combat at the front. As you can see, they have learned from the mistakes of the last times and have reinforced them with reactive armor. Remember the American Abrams tanks that they used during their summer offensive in 2023 in the south, that is, near Zaporizhia. They used them almost exactly as they were delivered. In the end, they just added a bit more camouflage material, but hardly anything against drones, which of course led to many losses in the first days. As I mentioned, this one has reactive armor and an anti-drone cage on the turret. Tanks remain vital to any army, even though drones are becoming more prominent. But on the Russian side, they're spreading what I'll call the wisdom that there's no need to produce tanks anymore, since they can be destroyed by a cheap drone. At the same time, they are also the ones constantly producing new tanks. In war, there will always be a new invention that will replace an existing one. But eventually there will also be good and reliable solutions against drones, ones that can protect tanks from drones. They will become highly relevant on the battlefield again, as they remain a key part of every army. Eventually someone will invent a way to bypass this defense, and the cycle will repeat. A Financial Times report says Putin is often given overly optimistic internal briefings about the front lines. Successes are exaggerated, Ukrainian losses are of course greatly inflated, and some setbacks are simply filtered out. As an example, the Financial Times cites repeated Russian reports of success at Kupiansk, which do not match publicly verifiable evidence. What an insight! I've been saying that myself for years. I think every normal person has known that for years as well. Russian statements, especially when they come from official sources, usually do not correspond to the truth. But for Russian decision-making, that's not simple. If the political leadership assumes there is ongoing operational momentum, the willingness to make realistic compromises decreases, especially with ceasefire offers, which from Moscow's perspective then come too early. The Financial Times calls this dynamic reinforcing, as a sugar-coated report boosts victory expectations. This expectation raises pressure on lower levels to report more successes, narrowing the space for clear decisions. It's important to distinguish between the political narrative and the actual reliable situation. Russia reporting progress for propaganda is expected. However, the Financial Times' thesis is that these distortions gradually have an internal effect as well, leading to strategic miscalculations, because the leadership and the generals are no longer operating on the same level of reality. And that's where decisions are made that simply can't be made because they seem absolutely nonsensical on the ground. I'll just show this here on the situation map so you can visualize it a bit better. Imagine the Russians want to advance from this controlled area into this Ukrainian-controlled village. And of course they decide, yes, we'll take this road here. Well, when you see this on the map, then you know. These two places here are still most likely only Ukrainian-controlled, since the Russians haven't reported any territorial gains here. So if you're a commander on the ground, then you know these two places belong to the Ukrainians. There's a danger there. That means if I want to get to this village back here, I either have to bypass them or capture them first. Now just imagine that. But another commander reports up to the general staff that these two places have already been captured by them long ago, and 10 million dead Ukrainians would be lying there, along with another 20,000 NATO soldiers. And he reports it like that. It gets presented to Putin, and then a decision is made at a very high level. Yes, if those two places belong to us, then we can just attack the next village over without any problems. So, you make an attack order clear and give another unit, which wasn't in this area before, the task to advance here, with the information that those two places already belong to them anyway. And now they drive along here and then get targeted here, from two sides because the Ukrainians are targeting the unsuspecting soldiers here. Attack failed, soldiers died, convoy lost. But why? Because everyone reports something different and everyone claims way too much territory for themselves, which isn't under their control at all. And that's the only way they can imagine it on a larger scale, for example with the capture of Kupiansk, which never actually happened. Special thanks to the Algel crew, Konami members, Lieutenant Colonel Reneke, Robert, Ziller, and Dietrich. Thank you for listening. Feel free to subscribe, like, leave comments, and see you in the next Situation Report.